I woke up to the sound of nothing. The music had stopped. No bass rattling the floor, no laughter echoing from the kitchen, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and a distant drip-drip from outside. I blinked against the darkness. My neck ached. From the angle I'd fallen asleep in, half sunken into a corduroy couch that still smelled like beer and someone's cologne. The air was warm but stale, thick with leftover party breath. I rubbed my eyes, pushing myself upright. The room was mostly empty now. Someone had left their phone charger tangled in a chair. A pair of high-top sneakers sat abandoned near the front door like they'd been kicked off in a hurry. I grabbed mine, slowly, trying not to make a sound, but my head throbbed with that soft post-party fog, the kind that makes time feel like it's stretching between seconds. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Dead. Of course. I thought about just leaving. I could call a ride, if I still had battery, if the rain outside hadn't started coming down in sheets. I shuffled to the window. Water streamed down the glass, catching the streetlight like silver threads unraveling. Josh was definitely out cold upstairs. I'd seen him disappear with 2 shots of whiskey and someone named Bree. Or maybe Bree. I wasn't sure she even liked him. But that wasn't really my business. I didn't want to wake him. Didn't want to be the clingy friend who couldn't handle one night of adult chaos. I could sleep on the couch again, or just sit here until morning. Pretend I was thinking deep thoughts. Maybe I was. Then I heard it, the quiet clink of ceramic against tile. The kitchen light was on, soft, yellow, like a distant firelight. I turned the corner expecting maybe one of Josh's drunk friends fumbling for water. But it wasn't. It was someone older, taller. He stood barefoot, half leaned against the counter, his back to me. He wore gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, sleeves pushed up. His hair was messy in that deliberate, slept-in way, like he'd been home long enough to stop caring, but not long enough to stop looking good. He stirred something in a mug, turned, and looked right at me. We both paused. His eyes were lighter than I expected, gray maybe, or green. Hard to tell in the kitchen glow. "You're not a burglar, are you?" he asked, voice soft, a little amused. I blinked. "Not unless burglars steal sleep on couches," he smiled. "Just slightly." "You must be Eli," he said. "Josh's friend." I nodded, shifting awkwardly in the doorway. "Yeah, sorry, I passed out earlier. I didn't mean to overstay." He shook his head, waving it off. "You're fine. Josh mentioned you might crash. You want some tea?" I hesitated. Sure." He moved without waiting for an answer. Grabbed another mug from the cabinet, poured hot water over a second bag. His movements were quiet, unhurried. Something about him was still. Not just physically. Like he wasn't pretending to be anything. Like the noise of the world didn't touch him. "I'm Caleb," he said, setting the mug down on the table for me. I sat. The mug was warm against my fingers, even though I hadn't really wanted tea. It felt polite to hold it anyway. I took a sip. "Mint." "Josh's brother?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded. "Moved back last month. Temporarily. I'm staying in the guest room." "What happened to your apartment?" He raised an eyebrow. "Wow. Straight to the trauma." I flushed. "Sorry. That was..." He laughed, holding up a hand. "I'm kidding, sort of. I had a breakup. Then a job change. Thought I'd hit restart somewhere familiar." I nodded slowly. "Restart button sounds nice." "Doesn't always work," he said, voice quieter now. "Sometimes you just unplug and hope the lights come back on." We sat there for a few beats, letting the silence return. Outside, the rain thickened again, soft but relentless. "I was going to leave," I said finally. "But I didn't want to call a ride and wake Josh. And my phone's dead." Caleb nodded like that made perfect sense. He glanced down the hallway. "Josh is out cold." You'd have better luck waking the couch. I smiled despite myself. I can grab you a blanket, he offered, already moving toward the hall. Or if you want, take Josh's bed. He won't notice. I've done it before. You sure? Positive. He once slept on a pool float in the kitchen after prom. He's indestructible. He disappeared for a moment, then came back with a neatly folded quilt and an extra pillow. Handed them to me with a half smile. Guest services, he said with a slight bow. I laughed. Thanks, Caleb. He nodded. Sleep well, Eli. As he walked back down the hall, I watched him for a second longer than I meant to. Not because of anything romantic. At least that's what I told myself. It was the way he moved. Like he'd done this before, helped strangers, made tea for guests who weren't supposed to be there. Like he knew how to leave space without making you feel empty. I lay down in Josh's bed that night, the quilt pulled around me, tea still warming my hands, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was in the wrong place. Just maybe a quiet one, and that was enough. I stared at the ceiling for maybe 20 minutes. Josh's bed was too soft, or maybe too unfamiliar. My mind wouldn't shut off. The house had that hum old houses get when everything's supposed to be asleep. Floorboards creaking at odd intervals, pipes moaning faintly behind the walls. The kind of silence that amplifies your own thoughts. I tossed once, twice, gave up. The hallway was dark except for the sliver of light bleeding from the kitchen again and the faint clink of ceramic. He was still up. I padded softly back toward the glow. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping for sleep in the shape of another voice. Caleb sat at the table, same as before, same mug. Elbows resting on wood, hands wrapped around the ceramic like it held warmth from somewhere older than the kettle. He looked up. Didn't flinch. Just nodded slightly. Can't sleep? He asked. I shook my head. Tried. I think Josh's pillows are filled with lies. That got a laugh from him, a real one. Not loud, but enough to crinkle the corners of his eyes. Want another cup? He offered, already reaching for the cabinet. Yeah, I said, surprising myself. If it's still that mint stuff. He made it without asking further. The same, quiet movement. The same calm. I sat across from him again, like we'd done this before. He pushed the mug toward me, then leaned back in his chair and stretched a little, like the day was finally shaking loose from his shoulders. You always drink tea at 2 a.m., I asked. Only on nights that feel like they're still holding their breath. I looked at him. That makes no sense, I said. He grinned. Exactly. We sat in the kind of silence that wasn't awkward, just full, like we both understood that filling it too quickly might break something delicate. Josh said you moved back a few weeks ago, I said. Caleb nodded. About a month. Temporarily, though. Or at least, that was the plan. What changed? He paused. Swirled the tea in his mug. Life, I guess. Had a job in Portland. Lived with someone. Thought that meant I was building something solid. He looked at me, but not directly. Just over the rim of the mug, like he was testing how honest to be. Turns out, I was just holding pieces while someone else decided what to keep. I let that sit for a beat. Break up? He nodded. Yeah, nothing explosive. No cheating, no screaming. Just slowly stopped speaking the same language. One day, I realized I didn't recognize the person across from me. Worse, I didn't recognize myself. That's rough, I said, softly. He smiled, but there was something tired in it. You? Me? He nodded. You've got that look. What look? Like someone trying to convince themselves they're not lost. I blinked. That stung a little more than it. Should've, mostly because it was true. Graduated 6 months ago, I said. Thought it'd feel more like a beginning. But it just feels like drifting. Josh got into tech, like he always planned. I stayed in the city for a while, did some design work, freelance stuff, but it all feels disjointed, like I'm patching together someone else's idea of a life. Caleb watched me for a long second, not judging, just seeing. That was almost worse. "You draw?" he asked. I nodded. "Mostly digital now. Used to do charcoal. Still sketch in my notebooks when I remember to sit still." He tapped the side of his mug. "What kind of things?" "Hands," I said before thinking. I don't know why. Maybe because they always say more than people do. He smiled at that. "That's true." A beat passed, then another. I looked down at my arms, suddenly aware of the goosebumps crawling up them. "Still cold?" Caleb asked. "I'm fine." "You look like a walking chill," he said gently. "Hold on." He stood, crossed to the hallway closet. His movements were slower this time, less precise, like the weight of the night was finally settling into his spine. I watched him, not to be weird, just curious. The way he rubbed the back of his neck, how his shoulders sloped when he reached up, like someone who carried too much but didn't complain about the load. He returned with an old hoodie, faded navy, sleeves a bit stretched, the collar frayed just slightly. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "Was always my favorite, just don't tell Josh I lent it out." I slipped it on. It smelled faintly of cedar and laundry soap, and something else, something that felt like warmth without heat. "Thanks," I murmured. "You're welcome." His voice was quieter now, almost careful. We didn't speak for a while after that, just sat. 2 mugs, 2 small silences between us. I didn't need to fill them, neither did he. It was a strange kind of comfort, not the kind that shouts, "You're safe," but the kind that whispers, "You don't have to be anything right now." I didn't realize how long we'd been sitting there until Caleb glanced at the window. The faintest light was starting to stretch its way across the sky. Not sunrise exactly, but close. "I should let you sleep," he said. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably." He stood, carried his mug to the sink, washed it quietly. Before I could stop myself, I said, "Thanks for staying up. I didn't mean to make it a whole thing." He looked at me for a long moment. "Sometimes the thing just needs to happen." I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I liked the sound of it. As I stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection on the window. Hoodie too big, hair a mess, eyes slightly wide from things I didn't quite understand yet. And beside me, Caleb. Steady. Present. I thought about hands again. The ones that hold, the ones that let go. And the ones that make tea for strangers because they know what it means to be awake at the sigh. Wrong hour. I went back to bed, but I didn't feel alone. The rain had eased by the time I woke again, though I wasn't sure I'd really slept. Just drifted. Outside, the sky was shifting, that pre-dawn gray where the world holds its breath. I didn't check the time. Didn't need to. It was the hour that belonged to no one. I wandered back downstairs barefoot, hoodie still on, the hem brushing the tops of my thighs. I wasn't expecting anyone to be awake, but he was. Caleb stood at the front door, holding it open with one hand. The scent of wet pavement and cedar drifted in. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked softly. He glanced over his shoulder. "Didn't try." We didn't speak after that, just stepped out onto the porch. The wood was damp beneath our feet, but the air was clean, rain-washed, gentle. We sat side by side on the top step, shoulders inches apart, mugs warm between our palms. I'd never felt closer to someone while saying so little. A street lamp flickered out in the distance. Somewhere a bird let out a cautious call like it wasn't sure if morning had officially arrived. You ever feel like people mistake your quiet for not caring? Caleb asked, breaking the silence. I turned to look at him, surprised by the sudden intimacy of the question. All the time, I said. He nodded, like that answer came from somewhere he'd lived too. With my ex, he began, staring into the street. It was always like that. I was the calm one. The one who folded towels right, bought the groceries, showed up when I said I would. But when things got hard, he'd accuse me of being distant, like quiet meant disinterest. That's not fair, I said, watching the way his fingers curled, slightly around the mug's handle, not gripping, just holding, like he didn't want to break it. He shrugged. He said I was like a lighthouse that never turned its beam. Always there, never really reaching anyone. That's a brutal metaphor, I muttered. He laughed once, a breath, not a sound. I guess I gave more than I realized. He said after a pause. And when he left, it wasn't even dramatic. Just a text. We want different things. That was it. I wanted to say something comforting, but what came out was, he was wrong. Caleb glanced at me, brow raised. You reach people, I said. Maybe not loudly, but it counts. He looked at me for a long time after that. Something behind his eyes shifted. Not quite a smile, not quite sadness. Just something honest. Bare. I swallowed, staring into my mug. I had a thing once, I said. It wasn't even a relationship, just a moment that stuck. We were in the same design class. Late nights, shared playlists, all that romantic nonsense. What happened? I told him I liked him, I said, voice low. He said I was sweet. Then started dating someone else 2 days later. Ouch. Yeah, I nodded. It's the little things you think won't stay with you that somehow do. We went quiet again. Not because we didn't have more to say, but because we didn't need to fill the space. There was something sacred about that early hour. Like we were on the edge of a world that hadn't woken yet, and it was ours alone. A breeze stirred the hem of my hoodie. My hand brushed his as we both reached for our mugs. And then, lightly, like a question, his fingers brushed my forearm. It wasn't a bold move, barely a touch, but it sent a line of heat up my skin. I didn't pull away. He didn't move closer, but he didn't move away either. My eyes drifted to his profile. The tired strength in it, the quiet weight. He looked ahead, like he wasn't sure what I'd do if he met my gaze, and for a second, just one, I wondered what would happen if I reached out. But I didn't, because I wasn't sure what this was, or what it could be, or if I was only seeing something I wanted to see. My throat felt tight for a moment, not from sadness, from the closeness, the carefulness, like we were walking along the edge of something neither of us had named yet. Caleb finally looked at me, and when he did, it wasn't casual, it was deliberate. He didn't smile, but his expression softened, just enough. I held his gaze, just long enough. The porch light clicked off above us as the automatic timer gave in to dawn. A faint blush of orange touched the sky like a secret being whispered across the horizon. I set my mug down beside me. So did he. We didn't touch again. We didn't need to. There was no kiss, no dramatic confession. Just two men sitting in the early morning quiet, knowing that something had shifted, and maybe that was enough. For now. The sky was already a soft, watercolor blue when I stood at the door with my shoes in hand. Josh still hadn't stirred. The house felt like it was exhaling now. That final breath of stillness before the day demanded movement. Somewhere upstairs, I heard a floorboard creak, but it wasn't urgent. Nothing was. Caleb stood beside me, hand resting lightly on the doorframe. We hadn't said much since the porch. But everything had already been said, in glances, in pauses, in the spaces where silence grew comfortable. I didn't know what to call the thing between us. It wasn't romance. Not exactly. Not yet. But it wasn't nothing. He looked at me, eyes slightly narrowed like he was weighing whether to speak or let the moment pass untouched. "You ever crash here again?" he said, voice low, mouth pulling into the barest hint of a smile. "Make sure I'm still around." My heart thudded against my ribs in that annoying, obvious way. I nodded slowly. "Okay." Just one word. But it felt loaded, heavy, alive. I wanted to say more. Wanted to ask if last night meant something. If he'd meant to brush my arm like that. If he'd stayed up with me because he felt it too, or because he was just kind like that. The sort of person who hands out tea and warmth to whoever stumbles into his quiet. But I didn't. I couldn't trust the words to come out right. Or soft. Or safe. So I stood there, hoodie still around my shoulders, mug long since emptied, trying not to look like I was waiting for something that might not come. Caleb opened the door for me. The air outside was fresh and damp. The neighborhood still, yawned in sleep, curtains drawn, sidewalks empty, the trees dripping their last beads of rain. I stepped out. The wood of the porch creaked beneath me. I was halfway to the bottom step when I heard it. "Eli." I turned. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other holding a small, familiar cord between two fingers. "You left your phone charger," he said. I exhaled. Shoulders, easing in a way I hadn't noticed they were tight. He held the cord out like it meant more than electricity, like it meant a reason, like it meant, "Come back sometime." I climbed back up 2 steps and took it from him. My hand brushed his. Warm, rough, sure. Neither of us moved away quickly. Then he added almost too casually, "And maybe something else too." I blinked. His expression didn't change. Still calm, still steady. But I knew what he meant. Or at least I wanted to believe I did. I gave him the smallest smile I could manage without my face betraying everything inside me. Then I nodded once. "Next time," I said. And I meant it. I turned, walked to the curb. The rain had washed the sky clean, and the sunlight, faint but promising, was starting to stretch across the street like a hand offering a beginning. As I waited for the rideshare that hadn't yet arrived, I glanced back once. He was still at the door, not watching, just there, present, steady, and for a fleeting moment, I wasn't floating anymore. I crashed at a friend's place that night, but I woke up to something else entirely. Not love, not yet, but the kind of quiet you want to fall asleep to, the kind that stays.